Well, you mentioned earlier about the relationships that Africa have had, a number of African states have had with the World Bank and the IMF, the Bretton Woods institutions and other agencies under MIGA, the rest of them. Not many African countries believe that they've had a sweet deal with Washington institutions when it comes to this. So perhaps the Chinese come with low-hanging fruits that they feel, well, we might as well go with this one.
Right. I understand your point. And again, I think there are criticisms to be made of the various levels of debt that aren't just from China, but it's been growing steadily over time. The issues that I'm pointing out are twofold. One is that the level of debt, I think, is quite concerning. And 40% of sub-Saharan African countries right now are at high risk of debt distress. That's above and beyond just China, but it's talking about really raising these levels to a point of concern. And the second issue, which I think we need to take note of, is that, again, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And some of these Chinese loans may seem quite attractive, but they can come at a high cost. And one need only ask Sri Lanka, where the Chinese had made large loans, the Sri Lankan government was no longer able to service them. And what ultimately happened is Sri Lanka essentially conceded to the Chinese the port of Hambantota, which is a strategic port in the country. And now that the Chinese have a majority stake, this is near a major shipping lane. There are real issues in terms of the sovereignty of Sri Lanka going forward. If you look at Africa and apply that, and you see countries like Djibouti and elsewhere that are increasingly leveraged to China, you might see that going forward, which I think would be very harmful.
Now, sitting down in the United States and looking at what China is doing on the African continent, how do you think the United States should respond, being a traditional ally for a number of African sovereigns, including the industries, companies, and the markets?
I think that the United States really needs to up its game and has been slow in really dedicating the resources that it should to encouraging greater U.S. investment and to increasing capacity and seeking more reciprocal trade relationships on the African continent. There has been a transition and a progression from President Clinton to President Bush to President Obama of really focusing more and more on trade and investment. But first, we still hadn't reached that level that we needed to. At the end of the Obama administration, there was much more to do. And second, in the Trump administration, we're not seeing the same level of focus on Africa, which I think is concerning. There is a lot of headroom for American companies. There's a lot of comparative advantages that they bring, particularly in certain sectors. And there's a lot of demand in terms of the African heads of state and ministers with whom I keep in touch, still looking for that American investment to come. But to do that, we need to make sure that the US government is providing tools in terms of political risk insurance, financing tools, commercial advocacy, and really highlighting the positive side and the market opportunity. And we also need to have the US government be a strong, reliable, and consistent partner to African states as they seek to continue to improve investment climates and try to attract that capital.
Grant, you run an advisory services for U.S. companies and companies elsewhere in the world who wants to do business in Africa, including investors. What are their concerns about doing business in Africa, the Chinese debt diplomacy on the continent, and a little bit of cooling in the U.S.-Africa economic trade and investment relations?
Since I left the White House in 2015, I've been running an advisory firm helping companies invest and do business on the continent. And their concerns really get back to issues of policy consistency on behalf of African governments, not feeling like they know the rules of the road or that the rules are changing with each new minister or with each new administration, and feeling also above and beyond the infrastructure deficits and the issues that they may face in terms of doing business in frontier markets, there are ongoing concerns about really the dedication to getting these projects over the finish line. They want to have clear signals about which projects are the priorities, clear and consistent policies to do that and support in getting them to close. With that, I think that there'll be even greater investment over time because there is interest. There isn't the level of interest that we need, but there is interest. And Ernst & Young and others who survey investors on the continent, they remain overwhelmingly positive and bullish on African prospects for growth. And I see that in American firms as well, just not in the numbers that we want.
Grant Harris, we thank you very much for your time today. We got to let you get back to bed. It's going to be a Friday and yet a business day before the weekend. Thank you very much out of California, the CEO at Harris Africa Partners LLC and the former advisor on Africa to President Barack Obama. Let's take We're talking about investing in agriculture in Africa. Quite a lot to talk about when we come back in part 2 after the break. Go live to Abuja, studios there, and we'll have these very great conversations in part 2 and in part 3.